Hello and welcome to the Content 10x podcast. I'm your host, Amy Woods, and I'm joined today by our co-host, Hayley Evans. Hayley, how are you doing today?
I'm so good. I'm really excited. This is the kind of nearly final part in our series, isn't it?
Absolutely. So on the Content 10x podcast, we have been running a series on expert interviews. So if you haven't heard our recent episodes, do go check them out. We're focusing all on the power of conducting expert interviews within your organization in order to create lots of great expert-led, human-led, undifferentiated content. So in the first episode of the series, we talked about why we're so passionate about expert interviews and what that can do for your content strategy. And then we went into another episode on the preparation alone. So just exactly how do you prepare? Preparation is everything. We covered, linking it with your content strategy and your key pillars, working out who you would interview, working out who would conduct the interviews, and then things like the questions and the dreaded tech and things like that. Then the next episode, how to actually run it. So you've done the preparation, but we ran through lots of tips and advice on running your expert interviews, whether you're running them yourself or whether you're working with a facilitator, but how to run those interviews to get the best content that you can. So we're super excited about this episode because now we are talking about the really, really fun aspect, which is turning these expert interviews into content. There's so much content that you can create when you are running video expert-led interviews within your organization. So the fun begins. So Hayley, where do we start? There's so much you can create. I'll let these get started.
Thank you. Yeah. There's literally so much that you can create from these, which is why we get so excited about them. They're kind of like our best in class form of content, I guess you could say. So, we've obviously covered the planning and perhaps the strategy in the second part. The creation was the last one that we've done. And really, this is about our distribution and our passion for repurposing this content. And I think there's so much more content that can come out of an expert interview than you might be aware of. So there are obvious ones. We can turn the assets into a podcast series. So I mentioned in the first episode when you're planning, this might be a standalone one, or it might be a series of episodes. So if I'm talking, for example, a series of episodes, this is where we could really, really emphasize on having it as a podcast. So you could have it both hosted on YouTube or your own podcast series. And we mentioned before, this is also key if people aren't fans of being on video, that you can just have an audio only one, which is a great opportunity. And you can turn it into obviously kind of social media videos. Again, don't forget if people aren't happy about being on video, there's the beauty of audiograms too. So it's still getting across that audio content as well in a really lovely, engaging way. Image carousels, for example, you'll use your social media post, but then actually the longer form content. So this is obviously the long form content itself, but don't forget long form you can turn into long form. So your blog posts, your articles, but actually even further. So what we quite often do is we might turn an expert interview guide into a report or a white paper, or really commonly, if it's a series, so for example, a 12-part series, you might release one a month. You might actually have an ebook that goes alongside it, summarizing each of those kind of key elements of those expert interviews alongside it. And in other forms of shareable content as well. So great infographics and such. But as you can see, just one episode can become so much content. We quite often find that these expert interview guides become a key pillar of content for the year, and a huge part of the strategy, that they can be repurposed so much that, your content calendar is full of this great content from a few episodes or 12 episodes across the year or even more, for example. And so it's really important that, we're planning that content across the platform. But the great thing is that it's that owned content. So when we're talking about kind of AI differentiated content, this is AI differentiated content. You own this content, and this content can be pillared as articles for other industry sites as well. There's so much more that you can do that differentiates yourself from your kind of potentially AI heavy competitors. That's where we say it's our best in class of content. But the most important thing is that you've planned this in advance. So going back to episode 2, if you've not listened to it, do check it out. The planning is everything. If you don't prepare, you prepare to fail, I think is the saying. But we mentioned in the episode 2 that we don't just plan the purpose of the content itself. So that, the expertise that you want to get across, we really plan the actual output of the content too. So what key sections do you need to hit as well? So if you've planned everything, you realistically know what you're going to be repurposing into, but do think broadly of that content that you can repurpose in, and don't just think of social assets. It's across every single platform. So multiple social platforms across your website, it can point to other websites. And also you can use this content to then, potentially be placed on kind of other podcasts as well. You might have somebody who's an expert has a series that, you guys could attend and kind of pivot towards that, couldn't you?
Yeah, and I think, you make a really good point that it's not just, so it's thinking about search and it's thinking about social as well, as in like blog posts, articles, YouTube content, etc., and then social and the social platforms that you focus on. And as you said, Hayley, you've got this big piece of content. So you've got it might be a 1 hour recording on video or video for audio only, but hopefully video will come onto that in a moment, that you can then break down. So you've already planned in advance, the keyword there, planned that you are going to create so many, say, short LinkedIn videos, because LinkedIn is the main platform that you focus on. And then you're also going to create so many image carousels, and you're going to write 3 separate blog posts and things like that. And you've planned all of that in advance. So you're working out how to take this big piece and break it down into the content. But you already touched on this, but just to emphasize it a bit more, just to remember that like repurposing can go in different directions too. So breaking big pieces down into smaller pieces and picking out the key angles and the key stories and the key points, things like that. But it can also be brought up too. So as you said, Hayley, with ebook or report, if you've planned over the course of 6 months or a year or whatever to interview certain experts to cover very particular topics, and the whole strategy there was that those topics were ultimately all going to feed into a big end of year report, or an industry report, or an ebook or something like that, a white paper that you're creating, then actually that's going in the other direction. That's taking something long form and turn it into longer form and that up into a white paper or report. So there's so much opportunity. And I think, when we say that video is best, as you said, Hayley, we kind of class like the video-led expert interviews as being the sort of the top class content that we love to work with. That's because we have all those different dimensions of content opportunities. With video, you automatically have audio, and then you can create written content, of course, from what these experts are saying, and then you can create visual content too, and so on. But if you didn't record video, there's those other opportunities anyway to just stick with audio only, like still have podcast episodes, you can have audiograms, things like that, or not use that component and still use the written side as well. So it might sit at the top, but there's certainly other opportunities. But I would just mention that if you were going to use this video content for a podcast in particular, so you're going to go and turn these expert interviews into podcast episodes, it is really worth considering trying to get this as video content if you can, because YouTube is, funnily enough, according to Edison Research, Infinite Dial Report, for the last few years now, the number 1 podcast listening platform, which is funny. I always kind of think it's funny because, you tend to think of, I tend to think of YouTube as just being very, very sort of obviously video focused. And then I'd expect to see Spotify or Apple Podcasts or one of those as being the top podcast listening, but it's not. It's YouTube people, the number 1 podcast listening platform. So that means the podcast has to be on there for people to find it and listen to it. So if you are podcast will not be a part of many people's content strategies here. I fully appreciate that. But if it is, if you are delving into the world of podcasting, then you will want to consider if you could have that video first approach, right? Because distribution is so important. And thinking about the long-term distribution as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it kind of goes back to the human element of it. You know, I think the video element of it is we connect better when we see a human. We see kind of who's talking on screen as well. So that's kind of why I think YouTube's really doing the best for the kind of number one platform for podcasts. And just thinking of listening habits as well. We tend to, if we're on the go, listen on podcast platforms. But I certainly, if I'm kind of home, it's quite nice having some faces in the background, some kind of community element. And it's, really kind of how do you bring your audience to you and kind of get them involved. And that's why we think video is hugely important. And I think as well, when we come to repurposing it, hopefully, when you've planned out the content that you want from it, you're also looking at how the performance of your existing content is doing. And if you have a comparison on kind of video content versus maybe your static content, there's a huge argument to then really kind of push that video content for teasers as well to increase your engagement really.
Yeah. And if you do have video content and then you are going to be putting that onto YouTube, if you are, like most B2B brands, quite focused on LinkedIn as well. And we've already been sharing here on the Content 10X podcast, particularly in the predictions episode at the start of the year, that for LinkedIn, short form vertical video is a big focus on LinkedIn at the moment with, I guess it's not really new anymore, but like the newish video feed only side of the LinkedIn app, trying to create that immersive short form video experience like LinkedIn and TikTok and Instagram Reels. With that being a big focus, vertical videos get so much reach and they are going to be a really key place on LinkedIn. So if you are creating short form verticals anyway for LinkedIn and you're going to start doing the longer form video on YouTube as well or not, you should still think about repurposing those short form videos to YouTube Shorts as well, because YouTube Shorts is really popular. And you don't often hear me say that I think that you should cross post from different platforms, because I'm quite passionate that everything should be quite platform specific. But with the exception of these short form vertical videos, an engaging short form vertical video that's suitable for your LinkedIn audience, I do believe would be absolutely fine as a short form video in YouTube Shorts as well. So don't miss that opportunity as we're talking about YouTube to be creating shorts as well as long form for the platform. And it can really help boost your channel if you are putting the longer form expert interviews to have short, engaging snippets on YouTube Shorts as well. It certainly helps with discoverability on YouTube.
Definitely.
And then in terms of the distribution, Hayley, so you create all of this content, and a key thing about these expert interviews as well is that quite often the content is evergreen. Not always the case, very much I'm a fan that if there's something that is very timely and an expert in your organization has a really clear view on that, and this is a hot topic, but it is going to run its course, do jump on that. But most of the time, we want to be creating more evergreen content so that we can then have a long-term distribution plan. Because we just talked about all these different types of content that you can create, but you're not going to create that massive ream of content we said and just share it all in 1 week or something like that. Hopefully it's evergreen and it's going to be part of more of a quarterly or even annual strategy. So what are your views on that, Hayley, in terms of if you have got that evergreen content and you want a long-term distribution plan?
I mean, that's our kind of core, isn't it, Amy? That's what we absolutely love doing. And the whole kind of point of when we repurpose any content, expert interviews or not, is the long-term strategy of that content that you can repurpose. So, it starts with planning, as we mentioned in the second part of the series, the amount of content that you need. So work with your team and, look at the distribution. Where have you got opportunities? Or for example, is there space to kind of create space where, you might actually look, we recommend kind of color coding content is a really good visualization exercise to see which of your 4 key content pillars that are being pushed out at the moment. You might actually find that you've got one content pillar that you might have a little bit too much content going out that could kind of be delayed. So make space for it, plan it out. But most importantly, another element that Amy and I are also very, very passionate about is actually seeing the results when it's out there. So how did the content do? What did you learn from it? What kind of worked and what didn't? And this is where it's very, very important when you're doing maybe a 12-part series across a year, so that you can glean the information from what's working and what's not, and then push that into the next episode. So you may, for example, have, I don't know, planned, you're going to have 7 static images, but actually the carousel's blown up and it's done really, really well. And that's what's working. So pivot, make sure that you're responding to what your audience wants. If they want more carousels, make sure that the content that you're recording has the opportunity to become more carousels. At the end of the day, you want the right content to reach the right people. But also, don't forget, it's not just got one chance to shine. And I think sometimes this is when there is a misalignment in understanding about repurposing content, because you may think that it's only a kind of one-hit wonder. You've got one opportunity to share it. That's not the point. And especially with evergreen content, it's, reminding everybody that I think it's the tweets, an average lifespan of about 20 minutes, Instagram on the feeds about 48 hours. And I know with Reels, it can be up to 2 weeks. LinkedIn is 2 days. So if you think about it, you've released that content, and actually realistically, the majority of content, you've got 2 days-ish, give or take, before that content's gone. And so give it the opportunity to kind of reshine again and again. And like you said, if it's especially evergreen content, year in, quarterly, you may have key goals that you want to do it, but yeah, just don't let that kind of repurpose content go to the repurpose landline, because that's not the point of this. This is the point of creating these expert interviews, is that you've got content that you're sat on that you can repurpose year on after year on year on. And also I think the other element is the long form content as well, Amy, is that those blog posts can be regularly updated and optimized. We do value the importance of search intent. So do have a look and see kind of where you can optimize those blog posts every quarter, just to really kind of gain as much as possible. And the one thing I was going to mention as well was, I think there's also an interesting point where some people might not be aware, is that actually only 1% of LinkedIn users post regularly, which is quite shocking when you consider the amount of LinkedIn users. And I think there's 1 billion on the platform or something. So if you think about that, and when we're talking about regularly, it's weekly, once a week is regularly posting on Instagram. Sorry, on LinkedIn. So if you consider that aspect of, then immediately when you're posting regular content, you are already skyrocketing into that 1%, the top 1%, which is amazing. And not just the top 1%, it's also furthermore the top 1% of undifferentiated content. So it's actually the top 0.1%, 90% of that content is AI driven as well. Make sure that, you're taking advantage of that on LinkedIn as well. And as Amy mentioned, if we're posting on LinkedIn, please make sure to take full advantage of vertical videos. It's a relatively new, I know it's been around for a little bit now, but it's still relatively new and being used. So your company has a huge opportunity to really hit the ground running with this and take full advantage of it. And then carousels, I mentioned that before. If I was going to be on board in planning strategy, that's the kind of first and foremost plan would be, let's get the carousel in. Hugely, we see engagement and reach really outperform on carousels. And it's just lovely, think about how you use that content yourself. The information that you glean from a carousel is great, wouldn't you say, Amy?
Yeah, absolutely. And also just on what you were saying about the whole, 1% of people, there's a lot of lurkers and people not posting on LinkedIn. So there's only 1% actually posting. Just another key point I was going to make to that is that when you're planning out this content and you're creating content for the company page or pages, depending on the different way that your organization is structured, making sure that it's not just the content going out from the company pages, but if possible, there was an expert at the heart of this interview that is the person who is sharing all of this wonderful views and opinions and things like that. So, seeing if you can bring them on board with the distribution strategy so that they are sharing content from their own profile, if that's appropriate. Obviously, I know every situation would be different. In that case, work with them with the content to help them. They may not necessarily know what to do or how to share and things like that. So including the expert's LinkedIn profile as being part of the distribution strategy of the content, but also your team as well, people within the organisation. And I know this is almost a new episode in its own right. We won't go too far down, but the whole kind of employee advocacy of working with different people within the company to make sure that they have access to this great content and that they are sharing it on their LinkedIn, because we know that profiles get more reach and engagement than pages. That's just a fact on LinkedIn. So being able to expand it out to other profiles and other people and the expert themselves and things like that is really key. And leadership team, of course, sharing the content. And then the other big thing, Hayley, I guess as well, is the whole don't just post and run away, isn't it, as well? You have to engage as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And just going back to your point there as well, is also thinking about other areas where you can signpost your audience to it as well. Yeah. So whilst you get your kind of team to share it, which is we, as Amy mentioned, could do a whole other episode of the importance of all of those aspects. But it's also thinking about where are those other signposting moments that you could really take advantage of. So some things that we do is kind of updating our page banners to notify our audience of, maybe it's a lead magnet that we have that's live, something that's really valuable, or another series. Updating your email signature is another one too. A pop-up on your website. Don't just think about kind of the repurposing aspects, also think about how other people are going to find that content in the beginning. So do think about that in your strategy too, of those signposting moments. And as Amy mentioned before, using your team too is really, really important. But yes, Amy, going back to your point about engaging, please engage with the content. It's so important to engage with your audience. What's it out in the world, and you're getting feedback and you're getting, comments and notes from your audience. Please respond to it. The algorithm does not favor a broadcast of a one-way street. And it's really important to create that audience, that community vibe that we so value. The more that you understand your audience, the more information that you get back from the audience, the better your future content's going to be. So you may actually find in the comments section that somebody's asked a question that you may not have considered, that actually could spur a whole new plan for your content that you may not have considered. So definitely don't just post and not engage. It's really, really important. It's social after all. So don't forget on social to be sociable as such, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, completely. And it can, it's easily done, but it can't be skipped. Like it's not a one-way street at all. It is supposed to be sociable and engaging and things like that. So just making sure that you do that. Well, this has been fantastic. I think, really great episode. I'm really pleased that we've covered now the real kind of, I guess, peak of what this all becomes, like all for content, how exciting it is that these expert interviews can lead on to so much. So as part of this series, we've covered in the first episode why we think expert interviews are so valuable and important and what they are. And then we've gone in quite detail into the preparation, and then a lot of detail into the actual how and the recording. And then today, the content itself and what you can create and the distribution and the repurposing. Hopefully everybody tuning in and listening or watching understands why we decided to break this down into a series, because there's just been so much to cover. Expert interviews can be so valuable. And this, again, it's about creating content that AI can't create. The AI cannot compete with you if you are creating this really authentic, unique content. It's undifferentiated. It's your experts, their views, their opinions. It's high quality content. It's going to be in depth, and it's going to be expert led, human, people led content. And this is going to be fantastic in terms of long form and short form content, search and social. It can power an entire content strategy. And so we hope that we've really inspired you with this series and provided just some really actionable, practical tips and advice on how to go about doing this. And we've mentioned a few times that we're going to be doing an FAQ episode to kind of finish off this series, and that's going to be the next episode, the next one after this. And so if you have questions, I appreciate this is really time specific because there's only a certain window of time and then we'll record the episode. But if you've got any questions, please do send them in terms of anything to do with this, expert interviews that become content for your company. And the reason I say that is because even if your question comes in after we have recorded our next episode, if we get, enough questions, we'll just go on and record another follow-up episode and so on. So we will keep looking at questions that you send to us, and we'll make sure that we answer them through our content, and whether it's another podcast episode or a separate video or whatever. So please do just send any questions that you have. So that will be to info@content10x.com. So fire them over. And we also have our impactful interview guide as well, don't we, Hayley?
Yes, we do. In fact, you can grab a copy of our impactful interview guide on our website. So if you head to content10x.com/interview-guide, you'll get our ultimate interview preparation checklist, which is great. A quick handy checklist before you do any interviews themselves. Our guidance, so everything you've heard from these kind of 3 or 4 episodes so far of how to deliver the guide and your message powerfully. Our tech recommendations, our kind of top tips for those, and loads more helpful tips from Amy, myself, and the rest of the team of how to really, really host these.
Yeah, absolutely. So do go grab a copy. Just click the link in the show notes if you happen to be listening in the podcast app. Otherwise, as Hayley said, content10x.com/interview-guide. So all that's left to say really is thank you so much for listening. So we're going to be doing the next episode, as I said, but Hayley, thank you for joining me, co-hosting these episodes. It's been great going through it.
It's been so much fun, and I'm really looking forward to anyone's questions. And please, no question's a silly question. If you want to ask anything, somebody probably will be thinking about the same question to send through. I really, really hope that you've enjoyed this series, and any feedback that you've got from us would be brilliant. Or any future episodes that you want me and Amy to kind of cover in depth as well. Just drop us a note at info@content10x.com would be brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. And it'd be remiss of me not to mention, just before we say farewell, that if you want any help with your content, so if you want any support at all with content planning and strategy, content creation, and of course content repurposing, whether it's webinars, virtual events, podcasts, videos, white papers, reports, you name it, and make sure to get in touch with us. We would love to speak to you and just find out a bit more about what you're trying to achieve.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Okay, well, all that's left to say then is thank you so much for listening to this episode, and we will catch you in the next one.
Thank you.